I'd like to start with a quick story and show you how this story is going to relate to a law, which you might be very excited about. And the story started really 6 months ago when we've caught an attack in AWS environment, a very standard one, S3 bucket, which was used for RAG, for machine learning application, where certain credentials were stored, these credentials were used. And literally within 8 minutes, those guys went to full admin. 8 minutes from zero, getting the credentials to full admin in this specific environment. And this attack was not just fast. This attack was very, very loud in the way how they performed the attack. First of all, looking at this Lambda function, you start to see these guys are writing very clearly what they're trying to achieve, getting admin access. This Lambda function was written multiple times within 3 minutes. You had, first of all, wrong usernames which were used, and at some point in time, the attacker guessed the right usernames. You had an attempt for lateral movement where literally within a couple of seconds, the attacker tried to move lateral and assume roles of this specific accounts. Now, this looks a bit strange, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And of course, these accounts do not exist. And if you just ask your favorite AI to generate potential random accounts, this is what you're going to get. Next, it was pretty clear that it was an AI and it was Claude being used. We're talking about November last year, just because the session name was called Claude Session. So that hacker confessed very, very loud as well in the way what kind of AI was used, and he was not really clear about that. Now, next, what they tried to do is they've tried to open up access to some GPU clusters and spin up some, one of those H100s, which costs you about $60 an hour. It didn't work. They've tried to name the workloads like Stivan. You saw already before the name Stivan. So apparently, most likely the user was called Stivan, which is a Serbian name. Everything was a Serbian. And then, because it didn't work, they've tried to open up and call this GitHub repo, which didn't exist. Now, why would you do that? We don't know that. But most likely, this was an internal repo from Claude, which was used for training. But this repo doesn't exist. All that happened literally within 8 minutes, with much more other activity, which I don't want to talk here about. But then there was a full break. It was silence for more than 50 minutes. Nothing happened. And then the attack, the next burst, started to happen. Again, we're talking about November last year. And this type of attack was just one of the attacks we started to see end of last year. And moving forward now to February last year, I started to hear as well from a lot of my friends in the community, hey, it's becoming so easy to find 0 days. And now, who of you in the room has found a 0 day already? A CVE? 1, 2, 3, 4, okay. So I've tried to do the same, and I've not really touched a fuzzer or anything like that for the last 8 to 9 years. The last time I've tried really to go for an exploitation on was 10 years ago. I'm not a professional at all. What I did is I've tried during a Sunday afternoon to build a small lab, static analysis, dynamic analysis, and then codify this in skills. Takes about 1 hour. And then I've just started this across some of the open source projects, very famous security tools, but also including our own software stack at Sysdig, Falco. And within a couple of hours, I was able to find multiple 0 days. Some of them I was able to confirm because we own the code. Some of them I was not able to confirm very quickly, but had really to work through that. But then I've asked myself, if it's becoming so easy now for me as a non-professional to find 0 days back in February, what does it mean for the industry? And I started to look back and literally just try to consider this 25 years of warnings, starting with Ross Anderson calling it out as an economic problem, right? We have the entire software is pretty much, right? So because we don't really We take security as an afterthought. So many warnings, up to the point that 2026, Sheen Heron demonstrated this, where we're able just to generate exploits for $50, generate kernel level exploits for, at mass as well. And I was just scared to which degree this might go further as well. So I came up with one specific number I wanted to measure. And this is the one number you need to know. In 2018, the window between a vulnerability being assigned, a CV number being assigned, to exploitations happening in the route, confirmed exploitation by attackers, was more than 2 years. Today, we are 10 hours. And this was a website I've launched, wipe-coded website with agents in the back, which will go out and try to collect all the information about all the different exploits, all the different patch informations, and try to generate and update this on a weekly basis. I've launched this in a conference, and it was signed, meanwhile, by Bruce Schneier. Bruce replied within 5 minutes, Heather Atkins from Google, Phil Venables, many other researchers, just because this number is very hard to ignore, right? And it's just one data point, and it doesn't matter if it's 10 hours or if it's 20 hours, because as the window shrinks to 1 day, you're all in science. It's becoming very difficult to measure the timestamps and everything. But I think it tells us very clearly a story that something has to change, and something is collapsing here, what we have not really seen before. Now, the worst part of that was that it's not just this time to exploitation window, it's also the way how quickly we're starting to see this exploitation. So if you just look back, pre-ChatGPT, 1 of 3 of the exploitations which happened in the world were non-zero days. And with 0 day, I don't mean something which is, a vulnerability which is unknown. I mean a vulnerability which is not where there's no current CV being applied. So it could be a 0 day, could be also, vulnerability which is exploited on the day of being published. From the 30%, we went up to almost 80% just within 3 years. So if you build on the assumption that you can patch your environment and patching is your primitive, this doesn't hold true anymore. And even worse, if you just look back at 2004, my good friend Thomas, published back then as well, the statement, every patch is an exploit blueprint. We now, with BinDiff, it's very easy to understand what is happening, and AI is so good at trying just to understand this pattern of what are we trying to patch, generate an exploit automatically, and use this exploit for an attack. And now some of you might, and after launching as well ZeroDayClock, I've heard a lot of this, feedback, but 0 days do not matter, right? We don't really, all of the attacks are happening because of credential misuse, because of phishing. This is the biggest problem right now. And it's true, because the attackers are trying to go the path which is the most easiest for them. But just looking at our own research, my team is pretty tiny in threat research. We are seeing this attack starting to unfold within hours. And I'm not talking here about CVEs. So Marimo, you most likely never heard about this component. Neither I. After the advisory was published, I'm not talking about the CVE. I'm not talking about the maintainer starting to look into this advisory. After the advisory was published, within 10 hours, we've started to see an attack. Our honeypots were hit for this specific component, exploiting this specific package. 20 hours for Langflow, and a couple of other components, actually. I don't want to talk about, but you start to see that exploitation happens systematically. Attackers are watching advisories, and sometimes it's just enough to understand which component is impacted for them just to generate a working exploit, go out, and hunt through the entire world to compromise that. So this is a new vector we have really to consider now. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, right? What is the elephant in the room? It's MITREs. Right? Everybody, like literally everybody is worried about MITREs right now. European Commission just had this call with Anthropic to make sure that banks can be tested by MITREs, which is very, I don't know if it's like the best use of tokens, because this is the industry. I was working in a bank, which is most pen tested ever, right? We spend at my bank around 10 million just for pen testing every year. So why would you pen test banks? But anyhow, I think what MITREs is doing is MITREs is showing us that it's not just about finding vulnerabilities, which is a very scoped problem, which models can inherit very well. They're starting as well to evolve in a way that they can move lateral. They can, navigate in this unknown terrain. And if you look at most popular benchmarks in AI and AGI, I think it's ArcAGI.3, right, where they're generating instant games, which humans can solve to 100%. But AI, like Claude 4.6 is, for instance, less than 2%. Like 2% of those games can be really solved by AI. So because these games are not known and models cannot learn about that. With MITREs and ChatGPT 5.5, we don't know where they're going to land on AGI Arc 3 because they have not been tested yet. But we see, at least from UK Cyber Institute of Safety for AI, that they're starting to become pretty good as well in lateral movement. And most likely a lot of that is still brute forcing. Because again, the AI learned something in the lab, and now it's starting to brute force. It's starting to get very loud, which is also a good chance for us, right? And I'm going to talk about that. But I think what MITREs has done is, if you just look as well through reported, and a lot of people who are using this day by day, is it just made finding vulnerabilities very easy. You don't need the scaffolding any longer, which I've built in February, like you having your own skills, telling the AI, go step by step, static analysis, inventory analysis, checking if the exploit is working dynamically, if it's novel, and so on. You don't need this anymore because the model inherited this knowledge, and it's just that easy right now to find nowadays. So go out and try to find your first 0 days. That's easy, and you don't need MITREs for that. I think MITREs is just a signal in this chain of events, because literally 1 day after MITREs was released, we saw some researchers here, for instance, from Iceland, coming up with some research where they've just used a model, I believe, less than 3 billion of parameters to reproduce most of the vulnerabilities MITREs claim to be found. And I think one of the heaviest vulnerabilities was a OpenBSD vulnerability, which was like 27 years old. And Niels, I had him yesterday on the phone, he came up then with his own idea to find this vulnerability as well. And Niels is the guy who committed this code to OpenBSD 27 years ago. He worked at Google back then. He used just open source models to do exactly the same, and even find some other ODAs which were not found, or which we don't know, but which are unknown currently, and at least we have not seen any claims by MITREs that they found it. So I think this entire discussion about MITREs and open source models divided the security community right now. There's a lot of discussion going on. But if we just look as well at general benchmarks, for instance, CyberGym is providing a pretty good view on offense benchmarks. We see that GLM model is performing even better than Cloud Code. So clearly open source models are already in par or very close in offense security to all of the frontier models. Now, what it means is, MITREs and all these other models, they're not really providing like a superpower. They're just making offense being more scalable and more cheaper. Now, one of the most important aspects around AI and cybersecurity is not just that offense is becoming that powerful. We see this everywhere, right? Everybody's talking about offense. Nobody's talking about defense. And now I'm going to tell you why this is the case. Why is AI getting much more stronger, better, more scalable, and providing a better capability for offense and not for defense? And that might be a chance for you as well to introduce some research around that. And let me start, first of all, with this comment by Anthropic when they've released MITREs. They clearly said they have not trained the model on cybersecurity. So you don't need now to show this new model capabilities or data around cybersecurity. They've just trained the model to be good at coding. The model automatically creates this capability to be good in offense, but not defense. Nobody's talking about defense. Have you heard anything about defense? No. So why is it the case? Well, you're always researchers, and a lot of, I guess, of you have dealt as well with AI. The most important thing in AI and reinforcement learning is to get signal, right? You want to have a strong feedback loop. You want to be able to measure something so that you can train models, or you can even give feedback to agents during inference if they're going in the right direction or wrong direction. All the benchmarks we've published over the last years, they've been almost solved. And by the way, this is a bit older graph I've put here on the slide. But I mean, the idea is just everything, if you can measure something, AI can solve that. So last year in February, a researcher from OpenAI, Jason Wei, published a blog which he called the Verify Law. And this law is pretty easy to understand. You have, first of all, the solution space, and you have the verification space. I'll give you two examples. If a problem space, if you map a problem on this graph, and the problem is very hard from a solution space, like Sudoku, a lot of variations, but it's easy to verify. It's easy to verify if Sudoku is solved, right? Very, very easy mathematically, compute-wise. This is a problem which AI can solve really well. The counterexample to this is diet, right? We can now choose what we're going to eat, going to Burger King or getting a salad. And then the results of that you're going to see in a couple of months, years. So it's very hard to predict how it's going, what's going to do with us because there's so many variables. Now, what I've tried to do last summer is to apply this to cybersecurity. And the results of this shocked me a bit because if you take, first of all the different offense domains we have in cybersecurity, you have a very hard deterministic signal back. Take fuzzing, take binary exploitation, everything, right? You're hunting for flag, you got the flag, it's a binary signal, you've compromised this machine. You're running you're running an exploit, you can clearly verify that this exploit worked or it didn't work. There's a lot, you popped a shell, right? So there's so many binary deterministic signals in offense, which you can use for both training, but then also inference of during inference of your agents. Defense looks very, very different because in defense, like take SIM as an example, I call it the suspicious information every minute, right? Because you don't really know if now there's an attack in the SIM data. Like 56% it could be an attack. It's very, very hard to get the strong signal everywhere. Like take, we just had this malware example here. If you look at a binary, is a binary malicious or not? We don't know that. It's very hard to say that. So what we came up with is just to build some scaffolding around this. And I'm going to talk about this, like having, for instance, attack graphs or having static and dynamic analysis to make verification cheap. Or in malware space, the easiest one is just we generate a hash and we push the hash down, so verification is becoming very, very cheap, right? But signal is not that strong. So in the end, just looking at that, what we can learn from that is offense owns the objective verifiers. Offense is very, very good in, specifically in the machine learning, just to understand did it achieve the objective or not, and inherit and learn this, step by step as well during the training process. But there's one good aspect as well for the defenders, because as you've seen as well with the attack I've presented you before, the AI doesn't know what it's doing. It just knows what it's trained to do. And every environment out there is very, very different. So defense is only this environment of variables. Defense knows how your accounts are being named. Defense knows how you deploy. And this is something what you can use as well as a very deterministic, almost deterministic, verifier for defense as well. I'm going to talk about these verifiers going forward because this is a very unexplored space so far in research. So now, how many of you are foreigners here? Saying a lot, right? And have a second language. So if I speak in English, I'm German. You hear my accent if I'm speaking very fast, like I'm doing right now. If I slow down, I might be a bit better. And the same is happening with AI as well. And the AI has an accent. Every time it tries to go fast, you will hear it being very, very loud. You will hear everything it learned before in the training data. And this is a good signal for you from a detection and defense point of view. Because this is something you can catch, right? And you can stop. Now, what does it mean for us, right? All of this we've just seen in offense, all of this, defense challenges right now. And I think that there are three big domains which are being challenged quite heavily right now. I'm going to talk about and then try to reflect as well the positive aspects of the current AI, transformation. The first one is the bug bounty models are broken, right? That's pretty clear. We saw already that we always believed that the submission side was a constraint. We always wanted to get more visibility, try to understand, give me the right signals, try to democratize this. But that's not valid anymore. It's the verification side. Curl bug bounty was closed in January because it received too much slop from AI. HackerOne, internet bug bounty, they've been operating for 14 years, if I remember correctly. They were shut down. Doesn't work anymore. Even Google shut down their program. Can you imagine that? Because they were receiving too much slop. And now what happened next is NIST and VD, which is enriching all this vulnerability data, also shut down their program. But in the same time frame, we see so much funding for AI. Expo, for instance, which is an AI penetration testing startup, they've been just valued at $1 billion. We've got Linux Foundation getting grants of 12 million. I think with Might is now another 100 million, specifically to hunt now for bugs. So this is something we need to reinvent. Bug bounty doesn't work anymore in the way it was working. The constraint is the validation, the verification. It's not anymore the submission side of things. Now, you cannot also, prioritize a patch if you've got already a breach. Most of the companies out there, they've built their vulnerability management programs based on the fact that, there's a prioritization happening. Like all this SAF, CAFs, known exploitation catalogs, CVSS, they all provide a signal if a vulnerability is getting exploited or not. Like even our regulation, the Cyber Resilience Act is going live very soon, and it's also considering if a vulnerability is being exploited right now or not. So it's definitely didn't caught up as well with a trend what's happening right now, because prioritization doesn't work anymore. NIST doesn't enrich anymore vulnerabilities which are not affecting the government sector in the US, right? That's a big problem. We have to find new ways how we can guide the programs around enterprise out there to put the right priorities. Now and then, the elephant in the room here as well is patching is no longer the primitive. You can even say patching is dead in the form we had this 3 or 4 years ago. That's a bit, extreme. But look, vendors are not going to generate patches in time. Not all of the vendors. You'll be as well not in the position to install the patches in time, because exploitation can happen now within minutes, potentially. Right now, it's happening within hours. So how quickly can you can't really rely on patching anymore. We wrote as well recently a paper together with the Cloud Security Alliance, Science, where it was signed as well by Jen Astry from CISA and many other people, where we just trying to show that patching is not going to work in this form. So we need to find new approaches how to cope with this problem. And there are a couple of solutions we might explore. You might explore as a researcher, because there's a lot of unsolved questions, like rebuilding infrastructure, for instance. There's some concepts where you can have distributed containers and then rebuilding this every day or every hour. You can have hot patching. That's something we've tried to explore for the last 10 years. It never worked, but looking at Linux, Unix, Windows, all these concepts are available. So you can potentially explore that part. Well, memory-safe languages. There were the first projects which already showed that it's possible to transfer projects and codify them in Rust, right? So we can do this now at scale. But how do we do this in a reliable way? Or AI-generated formal verification. There's, I think, 2 projects, to my knowledge, which are advancing this. One from DeepMind, CodeMenda, and OpenAI is also doing something around that, but that's not really formal verification. And Mistral also released something recently. So there's definitely ways about just to explore how we can apply formal verification not to the entire application, but first of all to patching. And obviously vulnerabilities. A lot of research questions, a lot of questions how we might be able to approach this. Perhaps you have one of those ideas how this can work in a better way. But then what's important to me, having spent more than 15 years as well in a bank, we have simply to say, officially, security by obscurity is not going to work anymore. Like all finance industry is still running on mainframes. You've got so many different OT environments which were not patched for 25 years. And this was always some sort of a defense layer, right? Because attackers had to understand as well how to exploit that. Nowadays, and especially if AI models are now going to become strong in moving lateral, that's not going to work. We have now potentially to move off some of these environments to air-gapped environments because we are not going to be able to protect them. And I'm not sure if we can rewrite now, even with the AI capabilities for all the software. Now, the good news is our security principles are still valid, right? Assume breach. I've been obsessed with assume breach. This is, if you worked in SOC, you have to assume that you breach. You have to assume that, especially if your first line of defense doesn't work anymore, because you can't rely on patching. You have to assume that your first internet exposed attacks, they're always breached, right? So deploy defense, runtime security, detections, which can keep up with the speed of the attack. Zero trust, yes, that's a bit of marketish, but understanding how you reduce the blast radius is important, and least privilege, obviously. So all this is still working. We just need to double down on how this can be adopted and make sure that this is becoming our invariance. Second, we can as well apply offense first. And that's a big, big chance for all of us because, first of all, we can find bugs before moving certain code to production. So if we can convince vendors to do that, that's already a good one. But then we can also, for the first time now, verify if a specific vulnerability is really exploitable or not. Because exploitation is very cheap. So I don't need now to have theoretical understanding, is it going to work or not. I can just throw away everything what's not exploitable and just focus myself on exploitable vulnerabilities. And then last but not least, and this is why I'm so excited about offense right now, you can now have continuous validation of your entire company. Like the most effective control right now to understand your risk is to run red teams. And you can do this once in a year, twice in a year, right? Just to simulate the attacker and try to understand what's happening. Now you can have it on a continuous basis. You can understand what is really important and what not. And most importantly, I hope really that we can eliminate all of the snake oil in cybersecurity based on that, because we know that 60-70% of the security controls do not add any value. They just slow down. And I think by doing this on a permanent basis, we can just help eliminate all of these problems. And now the next one is the one which is potentially most important for you is we need to build better oracles and not detections. And I've talked about that already, right? So for defense, to make sure that we can verify things much more easier, we need to have good oracles, good feedback loops for the AI. And the best oracles, and if you're in security, you know that, are canaries, honey tokens. They are deterministic. If something is hitting them, you know something is happening. Now, an untold truth is most of the EDR solutions today are detecting most of the attacks with honey tokens, right, in memory and so on. It's not just some sort of a EI they're using. And I've been working for the security industry for a while. So we need to explore more around that. Provenance and attestation. Replaying harness as well. That's pretty important. If you have the data, we can just take the data and replay and see, is that real or not real? Does it really create false positives or not? So how do we reduce the signal to be very strong, and now also adding the exploitation part to that? Invariance. This is huge, because by having invariance and describing the policy as a code, we now AI is pretty good at trying to help you reach this status quo if you can describe what good looks like. Most companies can describe what good looks like, but if you can describe this, if you can codify this in the software engineering world, but also in your configuration, that can help to sustain. Sandboxing, dynamic analysis, graph-based verifiers, obviously, that's important, right? Because it's a deterministic way to understand this vulnerability can be accessed externally based on this path. Or like Bloodhound and offense space is also pretty solid there. So these 6 verifier classes are very well known. I think what is not so much explored from a research point of view is this accent verifier. What I've told you before, the AI is learning something during the training process. And now you can try to understand this accent. I mean, I can totally see that you can even just make some research and try to fingerprint EIs based on the behavior, based on the accent going forward. Very interesting domain for research. Now, last but not least is, I think the good news is also that we have the same capabilities as an attacker to go into YOLO mode. If I'm asking today the AI to go and find a vulnerability or get this specific company being compromised, I don't click approve all the time, right? I go YOLO mode. I'm taking myself out of the loop. This is how most of the attackers are starting to operate today. In software engineering, we still have, if you just look in Silicon Valley, most of the companies, they don't write code anymore. 100% is written by AI. It's validated by AI. They still review before merge the code, so there's still a human in the loop. But if you heard about dark factories, for instance, there's concepts already to try to remove the human out of the loop. Great chance for security as well, right? Because now we can infuse security, threat modeling, all of that into this loop. In security, we still have too many humans in the loop. Or I saw an alert. Now let me try to do some forensics on this. Or how do I configure that? All that has to go. We have to take the humans out of the loop on the enterprise level as much as possible so that we can keep up with the speed of the attackers, because they're going to move at the speed of this small loop. And if we can't achieve that, we're going to be always behind that. Now with this, I've started with this 8 minutes, and just looking back in 2018, I think 8 minutes was like, I don't know if the analyst was assigned to start working on this alert or not, right? If the alert even reached the SIM. I remember in most of the large companies, it would take like getting specific syscalls from one region to another. It would take some minutes. Today, 8 minutes is a full attack chain. And in a couple of years, perhaps, just seconds are going to be enough to have this full attack chain being done successfully. So we can't really regulate this clock, but what we can do is to build these verifiers so that we can get the humans out of the loop and, with this, just be able to keep up with the attackers itself. Thank you very much.